session, special board workshop meeting. Translator services. Right. Prior to us coming back to order, I'd like to refer anybody who needs translator services to Miss Paula Valbuena at the podium. Thank you, Miss Valbuena, for your services.
Thank you, President Urban. Buenas tardes, habla Paula Valbuena. Si necesita servicios de interpretación al español, por favor llame al 1805-324-7680 e ingrese el código de acceso 876-130-998 más la tecla numeral. Este es un número totalmente gratis. Nuevamente, llame al número de teléfono 1805-324-7680 e ingrese el código de acceso 876-130-998 más la tecla numeral. También puede acceder a estas instrucciones en nuestro sitio web en mcs4kids.com dirigiéndose a la parte inferior de la página, haciendo clic en Quick Links y nuevamente en Board Agendas para ir a la agenda de esta noche. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the Modesto City Schools Special Board Workshop, February 26, 2024. This meeting is now called to order. In closed session, the board gave direction to staff. Roll call. Trustee Brown. Trustee Daly.
I'm here.
Present.
Trustee Lopez.
Present.
Trustee Mark. Trustee Mejia.
Here.
Vice President Maestas. Present. President Irvin. Present. Live streaming statement. Good evening, everyone. This open session meeting of the Board of Trustees is being live streamed at the direction of the board. The live stream is available on the district's website, and the recordings will be available for viewing the day after the board meeting. Regarding public comment, MCS has provided an opportunity for the public to provide comments. It is outlined on the agenda. The public has been given an opportunity to call in and leave a voicemail. Send us a comment or via email or appear in person before the board. Any public comment received via email or voicemail following the posting of the board agenda and prior to noon the day of the board meeting will not be read aloud but have been transcribed and printed with copies provided to each board member prior to the start of the board meeting and are available to the public. The voice and email public comments will be attached to future board meeting minutes for approval. This practice will continue until further notice. For members of the public that are interested in commenting in future, we welcome your comments. Public comment statement, Board Bylaw 9322B. If you wish to address the board during the period for public comment on a subject not on the agenda, you must complete a public presentations request card and submit it to the board president prior to the period for public comment. If you need assistance from our translator, please indicate so on the request card. Every person who wishes to address the board, please fill out a card. You will find the cards in the lobby. You can hand your card to Ms. Chambers in the back. Ms. Chambers? Oh, in the back, okay. Behind me. I also want to remind you, if you wish to make a complaint against a specific district employee, you should follow the district's personnel complaint procedure. Copies of that procedure are available in the lobby, as are agenda copies which outline the procedures we will observe during the period for public comment. The right to address the board does not exempt the speaker from any potential liability for defamation. If you plan to speak on a topic, please fill out a card now, as no cards will be accepted after the period for public comment has begun. The maximum time for any one speaker is 3 minutes, for a total of 30 minutes. Okay, A4, Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Flag. A period for public comment. Board Bylaw 9322B. It takes us to the period for public comment. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting and showing interest in our schools. Do we have any cards for public comment? Okay. Yes, I'm now going to turn over the mic and the next item B1 to our superintendent.
Thank you, President Irvin. First off, I want to welcome everybody here tonight for a couple-hour workshop. Really, the purpose and the point of a workshop is to give everyone an opportunity to be able to ask questions, to have a discussion, to be able to have a dialogue. What I've really asked staff to do is to create a presentation such that it's not just one of those PowerPoints that are 20 pages long, right? It's really stopping, asking, getting clarification for really two really important items. The first one is a budget workshop. School budgets are really difficult to understand. I've been looking at them and scouring through them for almost 2 decades, and they're still complicated for me. I think today it's a wonderful opportunity to really just kind of get into the nitty-gritty of some of it and have an open space to be able to learn. What's the difference between different budgets? What's the difference between restricted budget? What's the difference between unrestricted? What are the consequences for that? What decisions can we make around that? And many more different topics. So I really am thankful that Tim and Michelle and their team is here to be able to help us with better understanding our budget. The next one, which is equally as important, is special education. Special education over the last 6 years, especially since I've been here, has exploded in the area of particular autism, but it has in other areas as well. But as a result, I really want us to stop and think, if it's greatly increased over this last 6 years, particularly the last 3, where are we going to be in 5 years or 6 years or 7 years? Oftentimes a district our size can't just pivot in a year's time. So I really want us to put our hats as far as the future, not necessarily next year, but what do we need to be thinking about as we move forward in this next 3, 4, 5 years, and how are we going to make sure that we're set up for success in the years to come, especially with what we see is happening in particular populations, and this is student population. Central to this is transportation. How are we working with our students? How are we getting them to school? What's the best way for them to get to school? How are we ensuring that we are meeting all of their needs and, like I say, creating the right conditions for them? And that'll be part, again, a discussion rather than a PowerPoint that we just go through, but places for you to be able to ask questions along the way and learn as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Zerley, who is going to start with the riveting topic of school budgets. All right, Mr. Zerley.
Thank you, Dr. Noguchi. Good evening, trustees. As mentioned by our superintendent, this is a workshop, so hopefully you're comfortable with the information and are willing to ask questions. Stop any time if there's something that you have a question about or you want more information on as we go through. I have Michelle Price, our Executive Director of Business Services, here as well to assist with technical aspects of what you see in front of you. She's responsible and her team is responsible for preparing the budget and the updates that you see. This is our traditional annual reporting cycle. You've seen this before, but for 12 months out of the year, there's about 7 months that we are providing you with some information or have the potential to provide you with some information. And so on here, just recently, we've presented to you the January governor's budget proposal. And then now at next March board meeting, the agenda will have our second interim financial report. So that's where we're at in the cycle, and then you can see what's coming up. I made a slight revision to this. I'm going to hand it out now, and it's been revised, and you'll, if you could pass that around, please. But what you're going to see is some additions to what you have, what's on the screen, and what you had in your packet. And that includes what we're doing now is what we call periodic internal monitoring reviews, and it's to align with what you see on this slide, our first interim, second interim, and estimated actuals reporting cycles. I'll explain this right now, but as we go through the presentation, as the workshop, when we get to the end, this will make more sense as to why we're doing this and implementing this change. So you'll notice some red lines, red letterings that's been added. And in advance of getting to the board information, whether it's first interim, second interim, estimated actuals, we've implemented, or we will implement, these quarterly monitoring periods. And the first one you see is in October. So our year runs July through June. So after 3 months, July, August, September, we're gonna review, as a cabinet, we're gonna review our expenditures. What did you ask for? Or are you using it? Do you plan to use it? In advance of that, that then will go to our budget advisory committee that we have established. And then after the budget advisory committee, then it'll come to the board at that interim reporting period. In this particular case, that would be December. The next time we do that would be in January. So that would be October, November, December expenses. So now we have 6 months of expenditures to take a look at. Cabinet will be monitoring their divisions ahead of time to see, okay, are we trending with doing what we said we were going to do? Again, we're going to take that to the Budget Advisory Committee, and then that will be built into our first interim, or our second interim budget, second interim budget in March. So, and then we'll do that once again at the end of the year. In April, there'll be a quarterly review, and then that will be adjusted, that will be reflected in our estimated actuals, which is done in June. So this is our annual reporting cycle. You can follow this out throughout the year. You can see, okay, what's coming up next? What did we just do? But this is just kind of a map to follow, because it's our map that we follow when we present information to you. Yeah, the total general fund is comprised of both unrestricted and restricted funds. Unrestricted funds are not subject to specific constraints and may be used for any educational purpose. Although local control funding formula funds for supplemental concentration grants are unrestricted by definition, they must be used to increase services for the students that generated the funds. And we'll talk more about that, what those students are that generated the funds. And currently, those dollars are not supposed to be used to supplant local control funding formula base funded services. So it has to supplement, has to be in addition to what we're already providing, and we'll talk more about that later on in the workshop. Restricted funds are received by the donor for specific purposes. They are restricted. Whoever's giving us the dollars, whether it's federal government, state government, they have an intention for how the funds are going to be used, and we must follow that. Common classifications are COVID funds, both federal and state, Every Student Succeeds Act, Special Education, IDEA, state-funded programs, and local funds. So these dollars, they come to us, they're in our budget as restricted, and they have to be spent as either the entitlement or the grant suggests that they be spent, or demands that they be spent. Right now, we're going through budget development, and revenue and expenditure assumptions are the foundations for our projected district's budget. Since the budget is built upon assumptions, these assumptions change throughout the year, and they are adjusted with each financial reporting period. So at second interim, at the next board meeting, when you get your packet, there's some changes from first interim, which was in December, to now. That's because our assumptions have changed, mainly around revenue. We know what the governor is proposing for revenue for next year. That's reflected in our second interim. Assumptions they're not guesses. It's not Michelle's best guess. It's not my best guess. I mean, they are based on certain information that we have at that point in time. Now, those assumptions change. You have household budgets. I mean, you all, I'm sure, have a household budget. And I'm sure you build in assumptions to your household budget based on what your incomes are every month, what your expenditures are. So I just take a moment, you think about what are your assumptions? Do you use assumptions for your household budget? And are they similar to ours? I mean, you can see what ours are on here. We're really no different than a household budget. I mean, we have projected revenues, we have projected expenditures, and then we have actual revenues and expenditures. So if anybody wants to share what you think assumptions are and what maybe you use, either in your business or your personal budgets, and how do they compare to ours? Yeah, if you don't mind.
To them, yeah, similar budget, of course, yeah. Your budget. Well, I mean, I figured like it's basically like you have your mortgage, your insurance, like all those like fixed costs a year you're gonna get, gas, phone, like all those things that don't shift. They're every month, regardless of whether you use them or not. You have to pay them.
Well,
That's
how
what
about
I'm-
MID? So you budget for MID, right, for electricity?
So I budget for MID during the colder months. You budget a little bit more, and then during certain time periods where you're gonna use more gas, you budget a little bit more for those months where there's higher.
Right, but I think that's a great example. MID, let's say you budget $300 and you only use 210. That means there's some money left over. Or you budget $300 and someone leaves the heat on 24/7 while you go for vacation for 3 weeks and it's $500, right? And so I think that's kind of an example of something you budget for, an assumption that you don't really know exactly what the cost is. What else?
Yeah, and
What
I'm
else?
saying, in either one of those examples, it could affect the balance that you have, whether it's in whatever account you use, or you have to rely on another account in the cases that it far exceeds what you normally have. So there are times throughout the year that it's either up or down based on what your expectations are.
Track spending over and look at data over years. So that way I can see on average how much you spent on MID over the past couple of years during December or January or whatever those months are, so that I can estimate, okay, left the heat on. So, or something,
Yeah.
right? But I would need to go in with a little bit more data.
Trustee Daly?
With being self-employed, I have to make sure that if I want sick time, if I want vacation time, I have to build that into my budget and I have to save that from behind. So otherwise, I don't go. So then I project, okay, so how many days or how many weeks am I going to be out for vacation? And how many weeks am I thinking that maybe I'll be sick based on last year's or the year before and things along that line. So absolutely, that makes sense that we have to do that too here.
Turn yourself on. Technology, all these extra microphones, guys, have us all mixed up.
It's up though.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Say, being in business, like with my business, try to mitigate as much as precisely you're going to be able to.
So it's not entirely different for us. I mean, there are a few more zeros. There's a few more commas. Obviously, in a budget operation our size, We do, as you see in front of you, I mean, we have fixed costs that we analyze. We have historical costs that we analyze. We're doing that right now. Michelle and her team are constantly looking at the patterns that you mentioned. I mean, do we need to plan for something that's coming in the middle of the year? So those are things that happen periodically. And based on the prior slide, we're going to review that now quarterly, 3 times a year. We're going to review those assumptions and are we following through on our assumptions? It's just good practice to make sure that we're going to do what we said we're going to do or what we asked to do.
So, Mr. Zerle, I want to go back just a second. Appreciate that. Before you go to the next, I'd like us to go back to what funds are in the budget. General fund, so we have general fund. That includes restricted and unrestricted. I want to talk about that for just a minute, because oftentimes at the end of our budget, we have, let's say, $15 million sitting there. But that $15 million, just like if it was a budget at our house, the restricted part of that 15 million, you can only use on certain things. So it's kind of like if I put it into a household. Let's say, for instance, I have coupons that I can use for all of my electricity. And I'm going to calculate all of my money for the month. I have my salary, and then I have my electric coupons, but I can only use the coupons for electricity. That's the same sort of thing here. We have dollars that are in our general budget that can only be used for kids that have been identified through LCFF. Foster, homeless, kids in poverty, and one other one.
Homeless.
English learners. So we get extra dollars for those students. Even though they're in our general budget, it's still part of that 15 million. We can only use it for increased services. So it's just something to remember as we go into these next slides. He's going to start talking about the whole budget. It's the whole budget, but there's still restrictions on portions of it.
I have a question before you move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it kind of made me think of gift cards. Like if I converted some of that money into gift cards, like the only way I can use a gift card is at that place. So on the restricted funds, that second slide there, how often are these funds, how often is it audited? How often are these pieces audited? Because they're legally restricted. Does that or when they do that?
That's so funny.
And is it different depending on the fund?
Well, we do have an external auditor who audits all of our finances every year, but there are certain things that they focus on in each of those audits. And that audit report's coming to the board on March 4th for the 22-23 audit. In addition to that, we also have federal program monitoring, which we just got done with doing a huge, referred to as FPM, a big FPM review of our federal dollars, which is where they usually focus on that. We do have other specialized audits, like our bond audit for our bond dollars that will also come on March 4th. And then there are certain funds from the state that require specific individual audits, like some of our school facilities program budgets require specific audits. So it just depends on the funding source.
And if this is what you're asking, I mean, we audit every transaction that comes through. We have staff that audits. Does it belong there? Does it fit? We actually have our internal auditor in the first row back here. Thank you for the board for allowing us to increase for that position a couple of years ago. We have our own now internal auditing department with the goal of catching those before the external auditor comes out. So there's multiple times throughout the year that things are being looked at and monitoring.
What has been the impact of that internal audit?
Yeah, a big piece of our external audit is what is called internal controls. And so are we complying with our internal controls that protects the district, it protects our employees, but also, as Michelle mentioned, the federal program monitoring review. So, I mean, our internal auditor gets out in front of those reviews and gives us time to fix anything before the official audit or the program audit is done. So we have found a significant decrease in what shows up in our audits because we are addressing it before it gets to that point.
Thank you.
So we talked about budget development, now budget control. And revenues are mostly controlled by federal and state governments. But the board decides how to spend the funds received with budget adoption approval and subsequent interim reporting periods. Like most school districts, the majority of our district budget is spent on personnel costs. You'll see here, as of first interim, which was back in December, 74% of our total general fund goes to personnel, and 84% of our unrestricted general fund goes to personnel. And you'll see more clarity what those numbers look like coming up. Revenues for our district, again, this looks like most districts in the state of California. Of our general fund revenue, 73% are unrestricted, 27% are defined as restricted. Then we have 71% of those funds are local control funding formula based revenue. And then we have federal revenue, state revenue, and local revenue. So we all know that the LCFF was implemented to give more local control, hence the word local in it. So you can see why that's the biggest piece of that pie. And 96% of our unrestricted funding is our local control funding formula. That means it's generated by student enrollment and corresponding average daily attendance percentages for those students. And we'll talk about the impact of both of those as well. We have, of our local control funding formula, as Dr. Noguchi mentioned earlier, 79% is what's called base revenue. So every school district in the state of California gets the same amount base funding per student, whether based on whatever grade level that student is in. And then there's supplemental and concentration funds that are added to that for students that are identified, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But 79% of our funds are base funded generated, 21% are supplemental and concentration grant funds. The local control funding formula was designed to close the achievement gap, and it generated at that point in time base grants per pupil by individual grade span, and that amount is the same for all district and charter schools in the state of California. Then there was supplemental and concentration grants that were added based on unduplicated pupil percentage, as you heard. That's a combination of English learners, low income, and or foster youth. Where this creates a little bit of a challenge for us is all funds are, including supplemental and concentration, are unrestricted except for special education students. If you recall on a prior slide, special education is a restricted program. So special education students that generate local control funding formula dollars, they transfer to the restricted side. But if it's supplemental and concentration, they're unrestricted by definition, but they must go to increase services for the students that generated those dollars. This is, since full implementation in 2018-19, the local control funding formula, this shows a history of our revenue since 2018-19 to the current year. If anything, if you look at this, what trends do you see? The top part of this chart, the gray area, is supplemental concentration, and the blue, it should be blue shaded, is base funded. So do you see any trends in this from 2018-19 to the current year? I'll give you a hint. It's the top bar, or the top piece of the bar, the gray area. That, and again, if you think about the intent of the local control funding formula, it was designed to close the achievement gap, and that was defined as the students that were at most risk by one of those classifications that I told you. And so, since 2018-19 to the current year, that top piece has grown by 41%, while the bottom piece, base, has grown by 29%. So over the course of the years, more dollars have been given to supplemental and concentration grant students at a faster pace than the base funded. So just wanted to point that out. This shows our general fund expenditures, 57% unrestricted, 43% restricted. If you think back to the revenue, I think it was like 73% unrestricted, 27% restricted. You would assume that these percentages should match, but it's not the same as our revenue pie chart because included here, we're spending one-time restricted dollars received in a prior year. So this represents our expenditures. How much are we spending? And we're either going to spend that out of ongoing revenues that we have, or we're spending it out of dollars we didn't spend in the prior year that are in our ending fund balance, but have to be spent, as Dr. Noguchi said earlier, they have to be spent in that area in the future years. So 43% of our current expenditures are classified as restricted because, as you'll see in coming up, the majority of our fund balance is restricted dollars. It's dollars we didn't spend in the prior year that we were given to spend on certain items. So again, this shows the history of our general fund expenditures going back to 17-18. The reason the LCFF one started at 18-19, that was the year it was fully implemented. So this one, we go back to 17-18 on our expenditure history to the current year. And again, if anything, do you see any trends here in our expenditure pattern over since 2017 to now? Is there any trends that you see or want to question?
Looks like a reduction in unrestricted. Like it's balancing out. Supplemental and concentration.
Or restricted money though.
We're spending more restricted than we have in the past. And if you think back, I mean, if you go back to 2020, 21, and then what happened then? What was going on? That was the pandemic, and we were receiving federal funds, state funds to respond to the pandemic. And so those dollars were being spent because they were given to us in an effort to return students to school. And so that makes sense. That stands to reason. But the level of restricted expenditures in the current year has more than doubled since 2017-18. Now we know that's not going to continue. Those are one-time dollars. They have to be spent by a certain date. But you can see how patterns change, how assumptions change, not only within the year, but year over year. And the reliance of restricted funds on our budget post-pandemic is far greater than pre-pandemic. This just shows a breakdown of our salaries. This comes back to the 74% I told you earlier. That would be certificated salaries, classified salaries, and benefits. And then you can see how the rest of the general fund is projected to be spent. And then unrestricted looks almost the same, but those three pieces of the pie show up to 84%. And why is that? Well, think about the prior slide, how much restricted dollars we're spending versus unrestricted. We've been provided a large amount of restricted dollars, and so not all of those go to salaries, but our base funded salaries equate to about 84% of our unrestricted budget. This just shows that there are additional costs. We call them statutory benefits. Some employees may not think they're benefits, but some of them are. But we call them statutory benefits. And these are employer-paid amounts for every dollar of payroll. Employee pensions are the largest of these costs that total for a certificated employee 19.1, or I'm sorry, the total for a certificated employee is 23.15%, and for a classified employee is 36.83%. So for every dollar we spend, you add this percent. So we spend $1.37 for classified employees, or we spend $1.23 for a certificated employee.
Mr. Zerli, I want to just to ask a question. Actually, this is probably a question for Ms. Price. So oftentimes we don't talk about this because it's just the norm. It's what we do. It's what you have. right? As, let's say, anyone in our system, right? This is the retirement. This is pension. This is for someone that we were just talking about retirement celebration for May 18th. Put it on your calendar. We're talking about folks that retire after 30 years of service or 40 years of service or 25 years of service. And then they have a pension where they're going to have a paycheck for as long as they live. That is a wonderful benefit. And oftentimes we don't recognize that in our system until you get close to wanting to retire and you're like, hey, this is pretty cool, right? So I just asked this question of Ms. Price last week. So for me, STRS, what % of my paycheck goes into my retirement? It's about, you said about 7%, right? So
Yeah,
about 7%.
7 to 8.
And how much does MCS put in so I have a good retirement when I retire?
So you're contributing from your own personal side, an employee contributes roughly 7%, and the district for a certificated employee is contributing 19.1%. So those 2% added together is what's going into a STRS pension for your retirement checks once you
So
retire.
oftentimes, I don't think that that's necessarily calculated into benefits. When we think of benefits, it's usually health and welfare. But pensions are a big part because it is a big expense for an organization our size. We don't dictate the cost of this. This is dictated by the state. Certainly PERS is even higher than that. But this is an incredible benefit. And any question on that, come May 18th to our recognition for our retirees. And May 16th, we'll see kind of the end of that path. But I just wanted to point that piece out.
I have a question on that because I legit don't know the answer to this. The STRS, I know that percentage is increased over several years, but does that percentage, I know the state kind of controls how much the districts put in, but is that based on district size or district, or is it just like every district in California is 19.1? Like I never knew that.
Yes, every employer, every public school employer is 19.1, no matter what your size is. So that's the contribution, employer contribution for STRS, no matter the district size, no matter location of the district. And you bring up a good point. Going back to 2015, STRS employer cost was 8.88. So now, 9 years later, it's 19.1. PERS, which you see is currently 26.68. Back to 2015, it was 11.7. That was our employer. That was the employer cost. Today it's 26.68. Now that one is going to increase to 30.3 by 27-28. So think about the revenue. I showed you how the revenue was escalating over time, but our costs, our built-in costs, our assumptions that we have to make are increasing sometimes at a faster pace than the revenue that has come to us. So just keep that in mind. There is a relationship between the increase in revenue, but we also have a large piece of our operational budget that has to go to pension, our obligation for pensions, because at one point in time, that was the decision by the state of California in order to keep the pensions whole, so they can remain benefiting employees.
How often does the state how much lead time do they give districts on how it's changing over the years? Like they won't say just next year you'll be 28. Or do they give you like a 3-year average? Like what does that look like?
For STRS, STRS right now it's 0 for the next 3 years. That's what they're telling us. Now that could change. So STRS is going to be set at 19.1% unless there's action taken to increase that. Now PERS has a board. PERS has a board that sets their rates, and so we know, like I mentioned, that 26.68 is going to increase to 30.3 by the year 27-28. So we do know how that's going to step up, but so that could change. STRS could change. They could come to us with the adopted budget and say that 19.1 is going to go up. But right now, there's no, in our assumptions, there's 0 increase for the next 3 years.
Thanks.
Which is a positive. And Dr. Noguchi mentioned health. These, as I mentioned, these are driven by the employee pay. So however much we pay the employee, this is a percentage of it. Health amount is per employee or per position. So that would be a flat amount that's on top of this. These are percentages that are added to every dollar of payroll. That's the difference in those type of benefits. So just again, briefly, these are the funding factors for the local control funding formula. You'll see the base grants by grade level, then you'll see supplemental then concentration, and then our percentages down below, 87.50 for K-8, unduplicated pupil percentage, and then 68.95 for 9-12. You can see we have different demographics depending on the high school student, where the high school student is from, or the elementary student. If these were 100%, then those we would get the full impact of what you see in the middle column and the far right column. We would get those full dollars, but since they're not, we get a percentage of that, and we get the percentage for supplemental. But then for concentration, we get above 55%. We get a 50% add-on. So it's kind of just a different calculation. But again, those dollars that are generated by that 87.5 or 68.95 are intended to increase services for those students, that percentage of student, not blanket across the district. This shows a calculation. This was first interim, how much is generated, and then high school, same thing. Then we get into actual versus funded ADA, and you can see that at one point in time, they intersected, and then it's flat. Again, if you take a look at this, are there any trends you see? Is there anything you see here that is going on in this graph versus our actual ADA and our funded ADA?
Explain what ADA is, just to get.
Average daily attendance, so that's how much that student attends daily throughout the school year. Actual is the blue line, and which is dropping, and then funded is the green line. In a perfect world, those are going to be equal. But in declining enrollment, pre-1920, it's always we were protected, so we were funded based on the greater of current year or prior year. So the green line is slightly above, but then you'll notice post-COVID, when our attendance rates declined drastically in the 22-23 year, there's now there's a larger gap between our funded ADA and our actual ADA. So hopefully that makes sense to you. You'll notice that there's a straight line in 1920 to 21-22. That was our protection year. That was the COVID protection. So we were held harmless, no matter what our enrollment was, no matter what our attendance was. That's why they're flat. Thankfully, it was flat through 21-22, the funded line, and now we're on a 3-year average for how we're funded for the elementary district. Same type of trend, although it's a little more drastic for the high school. You'll notice a greater steep drop in 22-23 between actual ADA. So our attendance percentage for 9-12 students went down in the 22-23 year. And so again, thankfully, you'll see that for now, at least the straight line at the top, we're able to keep that in our 3-year average. And so the gap isn't quite as much, but this is why it's important to keep an eye on daily attendance, student attendance percentages. Then we have a multi-year projection, and you'll see that this is presented with every interim financial update. And you can just see here, it's required by law. It's assumptions and today's decisions. Those assumptions, today's decisions equal our projections. They're not predictions. They are projections based on certain factors at that point in time. Just some assumptions we build in. We have built in cost increases for employees, whether it's classified employee or certificate employee. If you're not at the top step, you'll get that next step the next year. So for certificated individuals, they have the opportunity to move columns or move across the salary schedule as well, with more credits that they take. Then we build in, again, based on historical trends, we build assumptions into our multi-year projection. We remove one-time expenditures, and we remove any carryover and deferred expenditures. Talked about this a little bit at the last board meeting. It just kind of defines the COLA. Won't get much into it, but the COLA is based on a change from one year to the next in its historical government spending. And it measures how much prices change rather than how much prices cost. So again, we're still seeing inflated prices at the grocery store. We're still seeing inflated prices at the gas pump. But that's not reflected in what the projected COLA is for next year because slowing inflation. So inflation year over year has slowed. So the change in government spending has taken a drop from one year to the next, although our consumer prices remain high. Just put that into context of what a COLA is when it talks about defining the COLA. Another multi-year projection assumption we have is what's that COLA for the next 3 years. And again, it's for next year is 0.76. Go back to the prior year, that was 3.94. So just in a matter of a couple of months, that's changed by 3.18%. 25-26 is dropped by 0.56%, and then 26-27 is dropped by 0.08. So this is why it's important to keep up on your assumptions. Make sure you have access to the information at that point in time to know what you're putting into your projections.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
COLA, January 2024, 0.76%, is that coming from the governor's proposed budget or the LEO's? Did I say that?
That is
LAO, right?
That is LAO.
Yeah,
That is
LAO,
coming from the governor's proposed budget. Now, those are defined points in time metrics, so there really is no difference between the calculated COLA between the LAO or the governor. What comes into play is how much can they afford? If that was say 3.94%, and we're having this current $76 billion deficit, the conversation would be, well, how much can they afford for next year? But the actual COLA is not open to interpretation or changes. It's based on metrics that are already set, if that makes sense.
Okay, so, because I know that there's a disagreement between the LEO and the governor's office. And so I think the last I heard, the LEO is even worse than they had said in January, expecting it. So that disagreement between them doesn't affect this.
It does not affect that number.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, yet. But like I said, what it could affect is how much of that number the state can afford to fund next year. So right now, because it's so low, even with the projected deficit they have, the governor has $37 billion. They plan to fully fund that. But if that was to be in what it was, 3.94 or above, the question would become, can we fund it? Are we going to have to deficit? Are we going to have to delay some of it? So I hope that makes sense.
yeah, that makes sense.
There is no question in that percentage.
Right, okay.
But what they're debating on is how much deficit is the state going to have? That's the debate between the governor's office and the LAO.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
But just to put that into a little bit of context, Mr. Lee, if, let's say, so right now it's at 0.76, that's what the governor came out. Again, we won't get finalized until June when the budget is approved by the state. Let's say, for instance, it comes out at 1.5, let's say it doubles. We're already, according to the governor's budget, 38 billion in the hole. That would put it into 50, 60 billion in the hole, because the higher this goes, the more the state has to pay, but they already don't have the money to pay. So it's kind of a difficult situation. We'd like a higher COLA, but currently we're already in a deficit for the state, and this is state budgeting. So we'll see how it all plays out by June. And that's what the finalize their budget. Just food for thought.
Correct. So then that takes us to our fund balance portion of the multi-year projection. So this is actually our second interim multi-year projection. And what you've seen up to this point is everything's related to first interim. But the first column is 22-23. That is that's how we ended last year. And then 23-24 is current year, 24-25, and 25-26 are projection years. Just to walk down through this, 22-23, we ended the year with $196 million ending fund balance. We don't have $196 million to spend. I mean, so now we have to now look at, okay, what are we legally obligated to set aside? What can't we touch? What can we touch? And so we go down and through this. And so we have 6% economic uncertainties, $33 million. That's what we have. Our district, our side is 3%, so it'd be half that. That's the minimum required amount. Our 1 month payroll runs anywhere between, depending on the month, it could be anywhere between 28 and $35 million, depending on what we're paying that month. So 6% really represents 1 month of payroll for us, just to put that in perspective. Then we have LCAP supplemental and concentration. Remember, I was telling you about dollars that are generated by students that can't just be spent on across the district items. So that's the 9.4. Those are unrestricted dollars, but they're restricted to services for those students that generated them. And then we have restricted resources. Those are those ones that came to us. We couldn't spend it any other way than what they were intended to. So $102 million of that $196 million was restricted resources ending fund balance. We take that down to, we have, once we factor everything out, we have $34 million, a little over $34 million is what we call unassigned, or 6.22%. So just an example of how you look for trends, look at the dollars, go to 23-24, the current year. We're projecting to have $167 million ending fund balance. Again, you can use the same analysis, go down. We still keep the 6% economic uncertainty. That's twice. I'll be fully transparent. That's twice amount for a district our size. And then restricted resources ending balance. You're probably wanting to know why it's less. Well, because we're spending some of that. We're going to spend some of that in the current year. Right now, that's what we're projecting it to be. It could grow when we actually do our unaudited actuals. And then we have $39.8 million currently uncommitted or unassigned, so that's 6.35%. Now, what's the impact of that 7.6 COLA on us? Go over to the next column. We project an ending fund balance of $156 million. So take that all the way down. The uncommitted then drops to $18 million or 3.29%, and then down to 0.5% in 25-26 or the next year of our multi-year projection. So again, this is just kind of an example that we like to work through. $196 million sounds like a lot of money, and it is. I mean, let's be fully honest. But when 100 million of that is restricted, it's dollars that were given to us for a certain purpose. It just puts things into perspective a little bit. So you can see how, think back to those trends that we saw earlier, how the restricted dollars were growing post-pandemic. That's a big reason why our ending fund balance last year was $196 million. Any other trends you see in that? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, and we had this conversation today. I had teachers come up to me and said, "Hey, John, over the years, even when you're in the district, the district always had these windfalls of money at the end of the school year, and couldn't that be a source for salaries or things like that?" And now you just clarified most of that because it still has its strings attached to it, whether it's restricted or unrestricted. It's not like those tags come off of it that it can be used now into a general fund or something like that. It still has those those restrictions on it. And so, you know, my question was, and, you know, I do remember those. Wouldn't call it windfall, as they termed it, but those things are unpredictable from, you know, from my past experience, when you can't rely on you're going to have X amount of dollars to be able to do this, because every year there's always, like they say, quote unquote, windfall. And so, you know, what's the best way to mitigate that or clarify that so people will understand what the end fund, you know, the ending fund balance, really what the picture is. You know, we're getting this clarity, and hoping folks is watching, you know, getting that same clarity on that particular item in the budget, so everybody's clear on it.
Right. So this slide may help provide some clarity to that. Again, like the former slides, this looks back to trends that have gone on since 14-15 to now. And so the blue piece, the blue shaded piece is unrestricted, and the gray piece is restricted. These are dollars in the ending fund balance. These are actual dollars that don't show up at the end of the year, but they don't get spent for one reason or the other. And so you can see our trends, especially post-pandemic, how the restricted funds of our ending fund balance have grown. Just for example, in 22-23 last year, restricted dollars equal 52% of our ending fund balance. Those are restricted, legally restricted dollars. Now, it's important for us to share that in our budget updates. We want to make sure that people are aware that, I mean, when we're adding dollars to our budget, we're adding dollars because they've been provided to us for certain services. What are those services that we can spend those dollars on? And then think back to the very first slide, we're now doing these quarterly reviews. We want to make sure that our budget reflects how are we trending. So there isn't a fallout, as you say, or drop to the bottom. We hear that a lot, and we should have to answer to that, because it does happen. But it's happened a lot since 1920, because we've been given restricted dollars that in many cases supplanted our operational dollars. And we were trying to spend $200 million. We were tasked to spend, you know, in excess of $200 million in the period of 3 years. And so there were some items that we had operationally that we could apply to the restricted dollars. In order to spend those, we weren't going to send them back to the federal or state government. But again, you can see here on this slide that when those increases happen, the big ones are on the restricted side, dollars we couldn't control. I hope that helps.
Mr. Shirley, go to the very last slide. You're going to skip one slide. It's going to go right to what President Irvin's talking about. So I want to try to explain this, Mr. Shirley and Ms. Price, and you tell me where I fall short, because I think this is directly going to connect with what President Irvin is talking about. So the very first 15-16, you have, this is the budget cycle. So you have the very first blue bar, it's the adoption, so that would have been in June. And then you have the first interim, which is December. And then you have the second interim, which is right about now. And then you have the estimated actuals, that's what we think we're gonna end up when we do the audit, like next week. And then we end with, that's the balance. So in this year, I would 100% agree with President Irvin and whoever he was talking to. We said we were going to end with 5.11 in reserve, and in actuality, we ended with 12.05. That's a lot, right? So let me go across this page. 16-17, we said we were going to end with 6.7, and we ended with 16 point something. That's a huge disparity. So teachers that are and folks that are in the system that lived in those years, yes, I would say that was a concern. 17-18, not as much there, 9% and 11%. So I don't know the whole story there. That was a year before I got here. In 18-19, again, they said they were going to end with 11. They ended with 12. 19-20, we said it was going to be roughly 4. We ended with 10. But remember, in April, we closed our doors. Electricity was turned off. Everyone went home, and it was COVID. So we were saving tons of money each and every day. 2021, we were only partially open, and we had a huge influx, over $100 million worth of COVID-related money being pushed into the system. Which brings us to last year, which is 3%, and we had 6%, but remember that 6% we still hadn't, no, that's where we ended up with 3% and 6%. This coming year, we said we were going to end with 2.5. Now, part of this story and part of what Mr. Zerley was sharing at the beginning of this board meeting is this sheet. This sheet should address the concern of what was shared with you. If we say we're going to end with something, but we end with something different, it shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise if kids don't achieve. It shouldn't be a surprise if kids greatly achieve. We should be progress monitoring along the way. So through this process, we're going to be progress monitoring with our budget study committee, and that's the red, right? So we are going to be 3 times a year stopping to say, what did we say we were going to spend? What did we spend? If we didn't spend it, it goes back in the budget, and then it goes to the next cycle. So hopefully, over the course of a couple years, because this is a new system, we won't find ourselves in a situation where we don't trust the budget, trust what's going on in the budget, because it'll be fully transparent and we'll be working together on it. It's going to take time to get there. So long story short, are correct, especially those first few years here, but as we've matriculated, it has definitely shored up over time. How did I do?
You did great. Well, one thing I'll add to this slide
I did it with something.
is, well, this just shows,
Understood it.
talking about assumptions, how the assumptions change throughout the course of a year. At adoption in June, our assumptions change at different points of the year because things happen. We have one-time money, we have carryover, we have deferred money, and so you expect it to grow from adoption, first interim, second interim, third interim. So I mean, yes, that's Dr. Noguchi did a great job of explaining this, but each one of those sections is 1 year's worth of how we're going at different points of the time. I would say a key piece to look at is the last one, the blue one, and see, okay, even in 22, 23, when there was a discrepancy between the yellow bar and the blue bar, go back to 21, 22, it's almost exactly identical year over year. That fund balance, or that part of our ending fund balance, did not grow significantly 21, 22 to 22, 23. So that, I mean, that tells us that the dollars we're spending are dollars that were given to us to respond to the pandemic, restricted dollars. But there's various ways to take a look at this. I know there's a lot of colors on here, but it just shows you that at any point in time in that year, our assumptions are changing. And we want it to be closer, yes. We want the yellow and the blue, the two at the end, to be closer, and that's something we're going to strive for moving forward now.
Can I ask and also clarify a little bit more context with this? What year, I know that the state mandates now a limit of reserve that you can have, and they didn't, like they've changed that. What year was it that they said, well, it can't be more than, I think it's 10? Was that right? Am I right on 10%? What year did that change?
It's not a specific year. It is criteria that's met with regard to how we're funded in the state that trigger that rule to come into play, and it was triggered in the 21-22 year to be effective. And the first time we've ever had it be effective.
Right, so basically we see these numbers here as 12, 16, 11, and those were pretty much over what the state said we should have.
So it is a 10% unrestricted reserve cap.
Right.
And that's of your uncommitted ending balance. So you can have funds committed within that don't count towards the 10%. So for example, we have a 3% required economic reserve for economic uncertainties. The board has committed an additional 3%. So that doesn't count towards that 10%. We have committed the balances in our supplemental concentration reserve funds, so any funds that are unspent there are committed. So that also doesn't count towards the 10%. So although the numbers may appear higher than that, when you take out the committed items, they are not necessarily higher than that.
Okay. And then you just mentioned one thing that I also was gonna put context to, is that there's a 3%, that's like mandated by the state. We have to keep 3% as reserves.
Based on our ADA, we are at the 3% level.
Okay. Okay. All right. That was what I wanted to clarify right there.
We're going to try to finish this portion up because we have another presentation on special education and transportation as well. So, Mr. Zerly, if you could finish up on the last couple slides, and if there's a burning question, we can certainly answer that. Otherwise, we're going to be moving on to the next presentation.
Yeah, I mean, that's about it. This slide just shows, it's something that comes up all the time. How many different types of employees do we have? As of August 7th, you can see here we had 1,754 certificated non-management positions, 1,937 classified non-management positions, and 264 management positions. So if you ever wonder, based on all those numbers, what's a 1% in cost increase for all of our employees? It was $3.4 million. This is just information
No, it's good
for you to
information.
have as well as we go forward. So that is it.
It
That's the
puts
end of
things
it.
into context. When you think of 1% for the whole district is about 3.2 million, or payroll for the whole district is anywhere from 29 to 32 million, it puts into context what numbers, right? Unless you can compare it to something, numbers don't mean much. So it kind of just helps understand the gravity of our numbers and how large our organization is.
Public comment, we're going out to the public. Comments from the public? Okay, seeing none. Comments from the board?
Can you clarify, so I just get this right, and I think I'm doing the math. You said total cost for 1% salary increase is 3.4, but earlier you had a slide on there that said you average a 1.5% increase every year? So you're saying every year about we can see an increase of 3.4, well, I can do half of that, is 3, 4, 5, around $5 million every year increase because of based on step and column?
That's our assumptions. I mean, there are some mitigating factors that how many retirees we're going to have. We're going to have a year with a lot of retirees.
Fluctuations, but
Right.
that's kind of
So
like what you're
we
going in
find
with
that 1.5%
assuming.
is just kind of so we're not chasing it every year. That's a standard that we use, that we put in to our assumptions.
Okay.
It gets flushed out at first interim when we actually have people that have left and new hires come on. We make those adjustments, but that's what we build in to our multi-year projection. Yes.
All right.
Next, we have Mr. Herbst.
I think they might need to load that PowerPoint. In any event, it is always difficult following Mr. Zierli.
No, before we get started, can we take a 5-minute break and we'll convene back 5 minutes?
Current efforts and areas of focus.
All right, good evening. Oh, my goodness, good evening, trustees. I have to admit, I'm truly grateful to be able to discuss Modesto City Schools Special Education Local Plan Area tonight, better known as Modesto City Schools SELPA. This subject is honestly very, very near and dear to me. I've spent the better part of 18 years in and out of special ed administration in Modesto City. And I have to admit, along the way, I've had the good fortune of working with some of the most talented educators within this area as far as I'm concerned. I've also been very, very fortunate to work with a board that's been very, very supportive, including the board that's here tonight. Also, I'm lucky enough to have two very, very talented administrators right to my left. I am joined tonight, as it takes a village, by Chris Romero, who currently oversees infant through 6th grade special education, and Dr. Christy Allen, who oversees 7-12 in our adult program. Presentation's meant to be interactive, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. And with that, we're going to talk about efforts in areas of focus. Dr. Allen, take it away.
All right,
I
so
think.
we're going to start this evening off, obviously, with our collective why, and that's our MCS vision. When we look at that, every student graduates with the skills, knowledge, and character traits essential to thrive and contribute to society. We want to ensure that the board and everybody understands that special education is at the center of that for us as well.
Sorry, guys.
Sorry,
make
there's
an adjustment.
Okay, I'll keep going, okay. On the next slide is gonna be the purpose of what we're going to discuss tonight. First, we're gonna define special education for you. Then we're gonna share 3-year data trends. We're gonna discuss our areas of focus moving forward, describe our inclusion efforts, and then really provide you the why and the benefits behind that District Goal 1.6, which is increasing access to general education for students with disabilities through inclusionary practices. So when we get into the heart of this, what is special education? Well, special education is truly defined as specific or specially designed instruction that is at no cost to our families, and it's designed to meet the unique needs of the students that we serve. It's mandated to be provided through the IEP process under FAPE, which is free and appropriate public education. Forward, push it forward.
We have opposite glasses needs. She needs them for right here, and I need them for you. So I'm going to read, and then I'm going to look. So you might wonder how students become eligible under special education, and it truly is eligibility criteria that they have to meet. There are 13 disabling conditions in special education for students that are school age. There's an additional one for infants that sometimes people aren't aware of, but there's an additional handicapping condition for students under the age of 3 that we utilize. But each of those criteria have very specific guidelines that help to determine eligibility, and those are identified and outlined in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that's how we determine eligibility, is utilizing those guidelines. They're set up to be broad in nature, and they encompass a wide variety of disabling conditions, if you will. And we've given you an example there that emotional disturbance is one of the areas that a student can be eligible for services under. However, that could mean that they have diagnoses and struggle with severe depression, bipolar disorder, or PTSD. So there's not one specific medical diagnosis or social emotional diagnosis that determines eligibility. We are really, really excited to share some data with you tonight, but this one is probably our least favorite. We are monitored through CDE with regards to our compliance and our improvement monitoring, meaning that just like general education, we are expected to grow and our students are expected to grow, sometimes at a different rate and sometimes in different areas and domains of instruction, but the expectation is that we do grow, and we are evaluated, if you will, through the state in 17 areas. Or indicators is what we call them, that are both based on performance but also compliance. So we are really an office that has to look at both of those pieces as we move forward. Some of those special education indicators, like I said, there are 17, but the ones that are probably most significant for us can be encompassed in those bullets that you see on your slide. It's obviously our performance and participation in the statewide assessments, but also our students' achievement in those areas that is measured through the CASP and also the CAW, which is the California Alternate Assessment that our students with severe disabilities are assessed with. Our suspension and expulsion rates, least restrictive environment, which you're going to hear a lot about tonight as we discuss inclusionary practices, our identification rate, which is how we determine a student is eligible for special education and whether or not that is commensurate with our peers throughout the state. Our timelines in eligibility and infant transitions, that means the students that we receive from regional center as referrals, are we effectively getting them into school-age programming at age 3 within 60 days prior to their 3rd birthday, so that when the day that they turn 3, we've assimilated them in and ensured that we've offered FAPE to them, as well as our assessment timelines. And then finally, our graduation and dropout rates for students with disabilities are just as significant for us, and particularly for Christie's area, obviously, is secondary, as they are for those general education students throughout the district.
Going to take a pause there. Any clarification on that piece before I get you guys into a little group for a quick discussion? All right. What you have here and what we wanted to pull was 3 years worth of data. So you're going to see the 21, 22, and 23 school years. What you're going to see is the K-8, 9, 12, total of the 2. And we picked 6 of the disabling conditions strictly because those are the disabling conditions to where we have the majority of our students. So we have autism, emotional disturbance, which was defined by Ms. Romero. Intellectual disabilities is really typically a pretty significant cognitive impairment, so it's that group of students that we're talking about. Other health impairment can be something like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It could be a seizure disorder. It could be a diabetic who requires special education because of the diabetes. It could be anxiety. So that really encompasses the other health impaired disabling condition. Specific learning disabilities can be dyslexia, dyscalculia, which is the inability to perform math at a certain level, could be auditory processing, dysgraphia, which is the inability to write. A whole slew of specific learning disabilities make up that particular section. And then finally, speech and language impairment, articulation, stuttering, language disorders, semantics, syntax, pragmatics. All students with that particular need receive speech. So with that, I'd like you to take a quick look, maybe talk it over with a partner, and then we'll have a quick discussion in terms of what do you notice about the data and what trends do you see? No?
Trends, I don't know if this is part of it, but so I'm guessing unfortunately there's some students that have multiple of these disabilities. In this graphic, would they be counted as one student per?
I believe this is an unduplicated yes, by the primary disability for somebody who has 2 handicapping conditions, yes.
Them autism numbers,
Yeah.
man, literally exponentially, aren't they?
Yeah, and I would say if you go back to 20, 19, 18, I would say you would be seeing a similar trend in those years even below. So a tremendous increase in autism.
But it's mostly in the K-8 area. The 9-12 doesn't see much of a difference at all.
Correct. Uh-huh.
There seems to be a recent shift in this other health impairment upward as well.
And again, I mentioned anxiety intentionally, ADHD, et cetera. But yes, we have seen increases in anxiety and attention deficit, which also leads to an increase in other health impairment.
That's uniform across all grade levels.
Yes.
Yet emotional disturbances is down. Decline on that. High school mainly.
There's been a lot of efforts to make sure that we don't over-identify with that particular disabling condition. So I also think that to a degree you may see a little bit of a spike in other health impairment because of that. Could be, and then depending on what that diagnosis carries would determine whether or not they're eligible under emotional disturbance criteria or other health impairment. We are pleased, specific learning disability has long been one of our largest handicapping conditions. That has progressively gotten less over the last 3 years.
Yeah, but what
Oh.
was the reason for, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Autism, because as the, as the SLD decreases, the autism increases.
I think there's probably more of a connection between autism and intellectual disability. You don't see it as much in the last 3 years. They're definitely better at identification. Specific learning disability, really, when you intervene quickly, MTSS, K6, can keep kids out of special education. So I think we see that. Any other? No? Okay, no? Go ahead.
That's a me question. So regional center typically diagnoses students with autism between the ages of 18 months and 3 years. The earlier the better, because we know that early intervention is absolutely critical and key through social stories, pragmatic development, discrete trial. And so regional center and most of our medical practitioner partners in the area are incredibly proficient at looking at medical diagnoses. We are going to talk a little bit as we move forward about the difference between a medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis, because they are very different in certain aspects. But as that medical diagnosis number increases, obviously it's proportionate to our educational increase as well.
Oh, quick question. I was talking to a parent, not from this district, but she definitely took up the opportunity that was a board member, but she was mentioning to me that she believes her son has dyslexia, but her specific school district isn't able to do anything about it because, or they say they're not able to do anything about it because he is a high achieving. He has A's and B's, and so it doesn't, they quote unquote, doesn't affect him. What she is looking down the line is that, yes, in fact, it doesn't affect them now in terms of what they're seeing at grades, but they don't see what's going on at home and all the time that she's spending with her student. And then looking towards college, which he's en route to, she would like to have extra support for him. So is there any, and maybe we can take this offline, but is there any like specific areas where she can actually have him tested that are not coming through the school?
Yeah, I would go offline. There's you could have dyslexia and it be so not as significant of an impact and not be eligible under Section 504 or an IEP. But depending on the severity of the dyslexia and its impact on your educational performance, that's where eligibility comes into play. That makes sense. Any other comments, questions? We continue.
On that, I mean, if parents sometimes put more on themselves than what they can get from the schools that we are supposed to provide. So I'm not saying this is what happened with that in particular, but I know that there could be a student who overcomes because the parents are putting in extra hours, paying for other tutors, paying for this, paying for that, when the school should be providing that for the child. How can parents get more information so that they can get services from the school district, even if their child is succeeding because of all of the efforts that they're putting in?
You would start out through the student success team process, because that's going to basically bring in information where we sit across from the parent and have that level of a discussion in terms of what they've done, what they're doing, and how the student's performing in class. It's tough because you would really need to have had an assessment to determine if there is dyslexic, I guess, like characteristics, then again, the impact that would be having on their education. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. There are times to where a parent my child struggles with reading. They opt to pay for private tutoring, et cetera, and the private tutoring and or the reading intervention may close the gap to where the impact on the education isn't as significant.
Because as I look back, I have a friend whose daughter was exactly in that position. And it wasn't until they could get, like, we had to push and push and push. Now she's succeeding at university and doing some great things, but it wasn't until they can really get those services that she was able to be, more successful than she was. And it was a fight for the parent. It was a fight with the teachers because she was never she wasn't identified, and so the teachers weren't giving the services that she really needed. So I don't know. Okay.
Can I just
No,
chime in
so
on one thing with
real quick,
dyslexia there?
yeah,
Just
real
because
quick.
there's been a change, just so, I don't know how long ago this was, but for you or your friend.
It's
but
been about 5 years.
Okay, so dyslexia guidelines for California came into play and were implemented about 4-ish years ago, where it was required for us to do it, but the creation of those were 6 to 7 years ago. Prior to that, districts and our staff were not able to determine whether a student was dyslexic or not. Those determinations and diagnoses had to occur outside of the school system. So if you look at the progression that California is making, and there are some things coming in the future that address that more systemically as well, dyslexia wasn't something that we as educators or practitioners could diagnose. It had to be done through an outside provision.
Thank you. That's helpful.
All right, we want to move into a little bit more in-depth detail on the autism identification. Ms. Romero?
I am really excited to share autism with you, just because it's a huge passion and a very large program in our district. And those of you that have been here for any significant period of time have absolutely seen an increase. And that's not unique to Modesto City Schools. Currently, across the nation, 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder annually. As of the most recent data. But in 2013, this rate was 1 in 140. And that's very indicative of what we're seeing in our programming and the increases that Mr. Herbst mentioned earlier. At present, we have added 12 highly structured, and highly structured is the name of our autism programming because it really talks about the methodologies by which we provide services and supports to students who happen to be eligible under this specific handicapping condition. There is extensive research and evidence-based practices, discrete trial, pivotal response training that really allow us to ensure students decrease that deficit and close that gap very early on with intensive services and supports. So we've added 12 of those classes since 2020, and if you count the 19-20 school year, because we had a mid-year increase, we have added a total of 19 highly structured classes in the last 5 years. And that is very indicative of really what we're looking at with our students who are identified in this specific handicapping condition or disabling area. Our highly structured program, just to give you a little bit of information about it, and then obviously we're here for questions, but this is a very intensive program. It's offered for students ages 3 up until 3rd grade, and there's very specific data and research that indicates that's the reason that we do that is because of brain development and the tying in to when students' synapses kind of stop developing in certain areas and move on to other areas of closure. And so we provide levelized programming for those students that are based on 3 main components, and those are listed for you there. But it's the instructional methodology that we use, the behavioral supports that we provide, and the intensive supports in communication that are embedded into the program, as well as individually adapted for each student's needs. We have a very high ratio of staff in these classrooms, and the reason that is because, as I talked about earlier, and as everyone has kind of defined, early intervention is key. So high levels of repetition, high levels of reinforcement, high levels of intensity with very consistent language usage, we know really affects and impacts our students in a positive way, with the hope and the intent that as they exit our program at the end of 3rd grade, they typically trail off into one of 3 areas. We either see them go straight into general education with whatever supports that are required for them. Could be communication, ongoing social skills development, additional prompting and supports through academics. Our parallel skills programming, which is still core content, but modified for students and scaffolded at a level in which they can provide or have additional access. And then our functional skills programming, which would be for our students with moderate to severe disabilities, where we're really working on their ability to navigate in the community, their ability to communicate their wants and needs, and their living and daily independence skills.
So as far as funding for the early intervention programs, does that come from our standard ADA funding, or do we have special funding for those programs?
So that's a great question. It's a combination. So we do have our IDEA federal grant, but we also have additional funds that are specific to preschool, and that do work specifically for our 3 to 5-year-olds. In addition to that, we partner with Regional Center for our earliest intervention, which is our infants, and we provide some of those IDS or infant development services up until age 3 in conjunction with Regional Center, so that we serve our own students with low incidence disabilities, as well as some of our other.
Having to dip into general fund?
For a class like that, probably around $200,000
Per
class.
Per class.
class.
Per
So
class.
that, and classes, how many students?
10 to 12.
So that's significant, where it encroaches on the general fund money.
Correct.
Okay, you know I'm always watching that.
Absolutely. I do want to, before we move on, well, one of the other big areas of focus has been inclusionary practices here in Modesto City Schools. So I really, and I'm going to give you guys an opportunity, this is a long statement, it's taken directly from the IDEA, but I really kind of want you guys to read through that, and I have really a couple questions. How do you interpret the statement, if you'd like to go there? How does this statement promote inclusionary practices, meaning students with disabilities in a general education environment? But does that statement mean that all students are included in general education? That's my question, as you guys take a moment just to read that, and then we'll have a quick discussion.
Public Law 94, 142.
Yeah, very nice.
I mean, it's a special ed credential, you know, that they drill that in your head.
I'll leave
So
it open for
can
anybody.
we answer?
Yeah, please.
So there's a lot of vagueness in this statement, like to the maximum extent appropriate. So who defines what that maximum extent and what appropriate means? And then in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids, like what are supplementary aids, and what if there's like what's the access to those aids and services? And then satisfactorily, that's another word that's up to interpretation. So there's a lot of up to interpretation here. Clear, to me, does this mean all students are included? It doesn't, because there's so much vagueness in that it's I don't know. It leaves it open to a lot of people's interpretation, which is a little scary on I guess on this side, but as a parent, it's also leaves me thinking what I can fight for my kid services to get. So it's an interesting statement.
Any other feedback?
Yes, I mean, for me in teaching in special ed, that it means that all students, regardless of disability, first and foremost opportunity is to be educated in a inclusive classroom, barring any impact on other students, based on things that they may need that we don't take away from the general ed students in that particular class, but all the barriers should be, there shouldn't be any barriers unless you run into the nature or severity of a particular disabling condition that prevents that from happening. But first and foremost, inclusion is the priority first.
Any other feedback? No, I will say it is purposely vague, and unfortunately that, and IEP teams determine that. Now, whether or not, unfortunately, in special education litigation is because of statements like that, there is no checkoff sheet that says you should have done X, Y, Z. It is all basically situational based on the needs of the kid, which is true. I will give the two ladies to my left a lot of credit. We have done a lot of efforts to support inclusion as we look to increase the amount of students that we have in general education and the time they spend there. We've hired a lot of additional personnel, coaches, inclusion specialists, paraprofessionals, et cetera, to help support that work. We've increased robustly the amount of professional development that's being made available to our teachers in an effort to support inclusion. And about 5 years ago, they created the Inclusive Practices Committee, which is really a group of administrators, general education teachers, special education teachers, leadership from the bargaining unit, in order to talk through what it would take and what would be needed to truly support our kids in the general education environment where appropriate. And with that, we just kind of want to go into a couple successes at the elementary and secondary level. So first, Ms. Romero.
So at the elementary level, we created the inclusionary model in elementary, which includes 4 inclusion specialists. And these are folks who support our students with mild to moderate disabilities. So we are not talking our students with severe handicapping conditions, but more of our mild to moderate. They provide support directly to general education teachers, directly to resource specialists, and directly to students in navigating modification and accommodation of curriculum, as well as any resources that students would need to be able to advocate for themselves or to utilize different supports in their own classroom in a way where they can self-advocate. Additionally, we've increased the behavioral support at the elementary level, and we've provided opportunities for our students to be included with their general education peers. This is particularly amazing at some of our sites that have our moderate to severe programming, which would be our functional skills and our highly structured classrooms. And so our students are included for PE with a general education peer partner, a teacher, so the teachers are going out together. Students are included in going into library with another class that's general education. They have a peer buddy to do that. They are participating in our prep provider program with support staff and with peers. So they're doing that with their general education peers, as well as our assemblies and field trips, which is a huge thing. And then we, of course, have students when they are able, particularly TK, Kinder, when they're able to be a part of circle time or some of those beginning morning meeting activities where we're really focusing on routines and learning stamina and building rapport and relationships with other students. Those are all occurring. Finally, we have a development of peer buddy programming at certain sites. Sonoma has been famous for their Amigos program for as long as I've been in Modesto City Schools, and I know it existed long before me. But some of our newer sites to having severe programming, like Kirshen Elementary that has a highly structured program, they have created buddy systems where they have students that earn time to get to go in and support the special education students in the highly structured autism environment through reading with them, playing a game of their choice, things that they have earned. And so they do have a buddy system there. And in fact, a brother and sister who had done a lot of work at that beginning last year were the people who led the Pledge of Allegiance here for the board earlier in the year. So we're really, really proud of that work, and that it's not just social, it's not just those opportunities like breakfast and recess and lunch that we expect kids to be included, but it truly is those other opportunities throughout the day where students have the opportunity to be with their peers.
Obviously, looking at 712, we have focused on increasing those inclusive opportunities, had the opportunity to pilot inclusion for self-contained classrooms at a couple of different sites. We started at La Loma Junior High. It's on year 2, going into year 3, and then focused on Hanshaw and Johansson for this year. We have had a co-teaching cohort. We actually have cohort number 1 of co-teaching. So while you hear a lot about the general education cohort, we have a cohort of special educators and general educators at every site, 712, except for Mark Twain, that are doing this work. They are strategically identified staff. They are strategically identified students, and the support is provided ongoing. There's an intensive amount of support the year prior at about 4 different professional developments that they get before they even step foot in a classroom together, with shared planning, PLC time, focus on master scheduling, and then targeted professional development on those roles and responsibilities throughout the year. We also build in into summer and winter and spring break time for them to co-plan, where we invite them to come back and work with our coaches to get support.
Do we have the video that is prepared for? Yeah, there we
And
go.
then
It's right there.
I'm super excited to show you this. How better to talk about what inclusion looks like than to actually give you a video of our staff, our students, and our families talking about how inclusion directly impacts their lives.
Hi, I'm Cassie Delgado. I'm the 7-8 mild to moderate inclusion specialist for the district. Inclusion has always been near and dear to my heart since I started with the district 17 years ago. I always was an advocate for getting our students with special needs more access to general education.
It helps us really become more of a community on campus and in our schools.
It's really embracing the integrity of IDEA by reinforcing the concept that special education is a service and not a place.
When I heard that SDC students were going to join my gen ed class, my first thought was, I am going to need a lot of help.
When going into the general ed class instead of the SDC classes, I was quite excited, but also a little nervous too.
I felt really happy to get a new experience and meet a bunch of new teachers and students.
I come from a household with special needs students. My sister is autistic and she was mainstreamed in the early 90s, and I saw how much that really helped her. So I was very excited that that same support was going to be available to more students.
Like my own 2 neurodivergent children will truly have a sense of belonging with their school, their classmates, and their teachers.
I've seen great growth in their social emotional, them making friends, and then also their growth in academics.
They learn how to be in a big group and work together. They learn good sportsmanship. They learn how to communicate. They have problem-solving skills.
I am offering all my students to be accepted, valued, and supported no matter their needs.
Figuring out ways to reach and connect with kids that come from a totally different background and learn in a completely different way. It's made me a better teacher.
Inclusion. Everybody should be included.
All kids deserve to have the best education that they can get.
The best part in being in general ed's classes is that I get to meet new friends and get more education.
I was ready for the challenge and I was really excited to go to general classes.
I felt really happy. I had a lot of great times.
The teachers are really nice and kind.
And my daughter's name is Janessa. The experience that she's received that she's never been given the opportunity to do before, it made her proud of herself, and she knew that she can do it because all she needed was the confidence to know that she was able to do it.
My son is James. The best part about him being included in the general education classroom every day, he's more happy, he enjoys school, he has fun coming.
You should always have confidence in yourself.
Advice that I have for families:
keep in mind that you're going to have a lot of successes. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but I believe our SDC students can be extremely successful.
I've had parents reach out to me and thank me and say that their kid has had an unbelievable experience.
One of these days, these students are going to grow up and not be with us, and we need to help them be a part of the world, not set apart from the world.
If you have the opportunity to do it, it makes all the difference in the world for children of that age.
And I know this personally, since I have 2 children with special needs, is that it can be really scary when there's change. But we really need to trust in the process and think about what is in the best interest of our students. So sometimes it takes a leap of faith in order for that to happen, and the ends justify the means.
Take ownership in some of the resources that we have, like coaches, inclusion specialists, that are at your site to help you build capacity in supporting these students, and really giving them what they need, which is access to that general education. I've witnessed such a growth in all of the students in inclusion, from gaining friends, from getting phone numbers on their phone that they've never had, and just seeing them blossom as students all around. It's really amazing to see.
It might seem scary at first to be in different classes, but actually it's not that scary. And for the parents, you should do it for your kid because they can challenge them and help them know how real life is like.
And now I see the sunrise. Now I feel glorious, glorious. I feel glorious, glorious.
I really enjoyed being in the inclusion program, and I hope you will enjoy it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was done by Mr. Garcia of the Viking Network over there, Joe Hansen. I can get it one more. And Mr. Morrow, I don't mind taking the transportation piece. No, I don't mind. One of the other pieces that directly connects to it and another part of the presentation today is transportation. Transportation is a related service. And that's provided to a student with an IEP when the IEP determines that that service is required. And currently, we have our services provided by a third-party vendor here in Modesto City Schools. We definitely have the ability to provide that service. And currently, we bus about 650 students who receive specialized door-to-door transportation. The programmatic benefits that we see by doing it ourselves, so to speak, is direct conversations with our own people. We would be able to work together to route students based on need. We'd be able to adjust and make adjustments to routes based on potentially behavior amongst that may occur on the bus. We'd also have the ability to schedule and prioritize certain scheduling depending on student need. This would also give us increased access to general education peers. Right now it's separate, and sometimes, unfortunately, there are times to where a field trip may occur and we cannot solidify the third-party vendor to be able to provide that transportation. And probably the most important, if it's our own people, we have the ability to do the professional development on all disabilities, student needs, et cetera. So definitely some benefit there. Our next steps going forward, we plan to continue educating on the benefits of inclusion. We want to continue to provide that increased access. With that comes a slew of professional development. We are prepared to continue to offer and even expand on those offerings. And then proceed with exploring in-house transportation for our students with disabilities. And with that, I turn it back over to Board President Irvin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Herbs and your team. And really good report. We're going to go out to the public for public comment. Any public comment? Seeing none. Trustees? Trustees, any comments? Questions? Seeing none. I would just like to say, where? You got it? Go ahead, Trustee Brown.
I want to ask the awkward question. I know that there's two sides to the inclusion story. There is the success of the student that's being included, and there also is the compassion of the students who are welcoming that student in. But I know that there's some resistance, and parents in particular frequently feel like by having inclusion in their classroom, the rest of the students suffer. So are we feeling much pushback now? Has that decreased over time? Where's our biggest challenge there?
I would say no. I think it's actually kind of a mix where you might have somebody who has that concern. You have somebody equally as passionate on this is how it should be. So it kind of balances itself out. There are still programs to where, let's say if it was behavior that could not be that we could not get under control, we could always move to a more restrictive setting, not in general education.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say, I mean, traveling to different countries, many during the military, and even personally, I mean, when you see kids in other countries, they're outcasts, you know, because of disability. And we, in our country, we embrace them, you know, and we serve them and with passion, and we make sure they get all the educational benefits and societal benefits in general that's afforded to them, you know. But it begins, you know, with us in the education field. So I just wanted to point that out, you know. I've been in a lot of countries, and you see a lot of things in a lot of different countries. And so, but I think we do it, I think we do it the best out of any country that I've been to. Thanks.
I'll use my loud voice. Maybe you can hear me now. So yeah, I do think it's great, but I do think it does require not to play lightly. That it does require a lot of resources. Does require a lot. So, and I don't want us to take it lightly. That it does require, and as we do more inclusion, it's going to require more, and that also means we make the decisions about how much resources I do think it is important. I mean, I have some experience working with it, but it does require, and every day it's the people make it work if they have the training and have that. Because I feel like if you don't have the training, you will get frustrated.
Agreed.
And all that. So I just want to commend what you've done so far, and I know you will continue to do more in that area. Let's not be take it lightly that it does require lots of resources and finding the right folks, the right teachers, the right professionals to be aiding in and with those special kids, because they are get a little bit emotional. There are angels. Some of them, I get to work with some of them, but you get to see them every day, and they go out of the way to say hi to you and all this stuff. But it does mean you make an impact for them long term that you might not see on a day to day. But I think you productive members of society if do this. Thank you for your what you're doing.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna turn it back over to Mr. Earps.
All right. Well, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Zierli because he's going to finish this with sharing some information on the feasibility of the potential of us being able to provide our own transportation for students with disabilities. So with that, I defer to Mr. Zierli.
Mark. As Mark did a great job of pointing out on the prior slides, there are many student and program benefits to consider district-provided transportation for special needs students. Not that our third-party vendor is doing anything wrong or inappropriate, but there are some advantages to do that ourselves. And about a year ago, a Special Education Transportation Task Force completed their work. It was about a 3-month study to take a look at those program benefits, not only to the program, but to the students and the families as well. And that report was presented to the board on March 27th, almost a year ago, and the task force at that time unanimously recommended to pursue options to provide district transportation services. Since then, we've also renegotiated the third-party contract with Store Transportation to include the possibility of what we call take-back of student transportation beginning in the 24-25 year. The board also approved that contract on March 27th, almost a year ago. Additional work that we've done to that point to possibly be prepared for this when the time comes is we've successfully hired transportation management with prior special education experience. So we now have a team, a leadership team in our transportation department that has various amounts of responsibilities for special education transportation. We're confident that when the time comes, if the time comes, we now have the leadership here in our district to pursue that and to consider it. We've identified property at Blue Gum and Pritchard Avenues for a possible special education transportation terminal. That property is $1.9 million. It would be to purchase the property that would provide us the space for a special education bus fleet. This is just an aerial view of the property. Just to the off to the east of this or to the right is Home Depot. Just to put that on Blue Gum is Home Depot. One thing to talk about program that you don't see on here is just to the north of this or at the bottom of this, we're south of that, I'm sorry. We're leasing property on Cummins Drive for programs. So our special student support services, including special education, will be housed right there on that property. So program would be there. If we were to do this, the benefits of having program with the transportation department staff right in the same lot would be very helpful and very beneficial to our students. In addition to providing opportunities for just extra space, parking space if needed by the district. Next steps, we just heard Trustee Mejia talk about resources that could be required. This is an enormous consideration for us, and it would require resources and planning in order to implement this. March 25th would be an opportunity for us to bring forward a recommendation for approval to purchase the property. That would be step one. That would be the first thing we need to do. We would then begin to finalize purchase of buses. First year, we would consider 10 to 15 buses. These are the special needs buses to provide transportation for non-ambulatory. These are students in wheelchairs, right? These are students in wheelchairs and transition students. These are our 18 to 22-year-olds that we're providing transportation services and transportation into the Modesto area. That would be our first year of implementation for 24-25. And if we're going to do this, we have to begin to engage with CSCA to create new job descriptions. We don't have job descriptions right now for special education transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Zealy. Public comment. Go to the public comment. Seeing none. Board trustees, I see Trustee Brown and Trustee Lopez. Trustee Brown.
So resources to pay for the extra transportation and facility space. How much of the needed funds would come from not having to pay the contract for the services?
So as we, Mark, Mr. Herbst said, we have 650 students that are currently being transported by store transportation. That equates to around 55, 57 routes. That's what we have currently in existence. So as we begin, if we begin providing those, we will not be billed, we will not be paying store transportation. Let's say it's 10 or 15 that we mentioned. So we would not pay store transportation for those services, for those routes. So we would basically pay ourselves. The 1.9 million would be an investment. We would have to purchase the property. We'd have to purchase the buses. Special needs buses run probably at around $100,000, depending on the type that we buy. For clarification. But when we start talking about operations, as soon as we're transporting our own, we're not paying store those costs. We're keeping that in-house.
Are there special funding sources available to us if we do it in-house that would be in addition to what we are putting out to pay others for those services?
For the equipment or for the people?
Either. What would be the funding source for the land?
The funding source would be, we have some dollars set aside for facilities, not bond money, but for facilities, or it would be part of our ending fund balance, our general fund. And then, of course, we already have the costs built into our operational budget. Those are ongoing costs. So again, it would be not paying, they would show up as our expenses instead of paying for those. For the buses, where we do have the availability for some vouchers. I mean, depending on what type of bus, if we want to look at electric bus. The difference, though, between these and our diesels is there's not dollars to expand. So a large amount of our diesel buses did not cost us anything because we got assistance on top of the vouchers to replace an existing diesel. We don't have an existing diesel special needs bus to replace, so we don't know if those opportunities would be the same for that. But we're pursuing those right now.
So one other question, if we are taking services away from store, is it possible that we can purchase used equipment from the vendor?
That is something to consider. That would be an option if they're willing to do that for us. But we would pursue all avenues. It stands to reason of 57 routes are no longer in stores' fleet of routes, then there could be a surplus of, but if they're willing to have that conversation. We have not had that conversation with them yet.
All right. Well, thank you.
Trustee Lopez.
Questions? The first, I guess, is in line with what Trustee Brown just mentioned. Because my question was, how, so what are, what are we looking at? Like if we were to do this and starting next school year, how many new bus drivers will we need? And then what would be the total amount of new bus drivers that we would need for the district?
We're looking at 10 to 15 right now. That would cover our non-ambulatory student population and transitions. That would be our first year of implementation.
And total?
Total, we contract with STORE for 57 routes. That's total, 650 students. We believe we would be in the neighborhood of the same 50, around 50 buses. We do have 4 of our large electric buses that are wheelchair equipped, so we already have some capacity on our own, but we would be looking in the neighborhood of the same amount of service that we currently have.
Okay, because I didn't know if we were, hoping to use some of our existing drivers into that fleet, or it would be a complete 57 to 57 transition over, right? And the other question was around the $1.9 million. That's just for the plot of land. What would you estimate that the total refurbish of that area would cost?
We've had some renderings of what that would look like, but we have not got to where we have a cost estimate. We haven't gotten so far as a cost estimate at this point. We can put some numbers together and report back. But that is undeveloped. 1.9 million is undeveloped as you see it right now.
Okay, I think that would be great, especially for our board meeting on the 25th. I think that would be something that I would like to see. Taking in the cost of going away from STORE into our own facilities. I know that straight out we won't be in the green. We'll be in deficit, right? As you mentioned, we will be investing into our own program. So I would like to see that as part of the presentation when we have this.
Yeah, one of the attractive things about that property is it's already paved. It's hard to find property that's paved. It's already a parking lot. But there would be some fencing, some protection that we'd have to put in order to protect our assets. We can definitely put a plan together for you.
Thanks.
Yep. When it comes time as well, can we get a cost analysis of electric vehicle versus the non-electric ones and how that will look over the course of the several years? That's a lot of vehicles, and if we can save energy with that many vehicles, that would be my opinion. I'd want to go electric if possible. So a cost analysis would be nice of that.
Okay.
I was gonna allude to that as well. The energy and that carbon blueprint impact on the environment, rather than we just got to a point where we're phasing out those diesel, and then we're going to be adding to the, if we go with this proposal, adding that impact back, where it seems like it may be offset each other, which we don't want to have done. If we can also have a timeline from if this was to go forward, all of those things that some of the other trustees have talked about in terms of from development, implementation to launch of the service within the district, and cost analysis of the savings, if any, based on us providing that services that compares the salaries, STORE folks and our folks, and benefits and all that stuff, and that's going to impact us over the coming years. So we can see, is this feasible for us? Before it's even doable, is it feasible? And there was one other, oh, that's the one Trustee Brown already took care of. So, and then see if Bluebird or somebody have the buy one, get one free EV vehicle.
Buy one, get one free EV. I want that deal.
Just to be clear, and I apologize if it wasn't, a new special ed bus would be unleaded fuel, so it would not be diesel. If it was, it would be gasoline, just like a car, a passenger car, but there still would be advantages to alternative, whether propane or electric or unleaded.
Yeah, that's 50 unleaded fuel vehicles, though, right?
Correct.
That's still a difference.
Sizable imprint. Questions? Oh, okay. Now, with that being said, we'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Oh. Trustee Daly, seconded by Trustee Mejia. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Meeting adjourned.